Journal state refers to a state of the game in which the event handling system has been completely broken. You set this up by watching something in the journal while inside of a sign or trigger region of other sorts, and from there it will break the event handling system so that normal events don't conclude with how they should be, but instead will conclude with going to the journal. This has many uses, the most major of which is in setting up double title screen, which gets its own video and then leads to a whole host of glitches, but even journal state by itself has some uses. It'll let you bypass side story triggers, it will let you interrupt certain cutscenes from stories themselves, and it also lets you bypass any guarded house by completely unloading the guards themselves, which is what the intro demonstration was showing off. Another unique aspect, or somewhat unique aspect of journal state is that it'll carry between files. You can set it up in one file, and with the event handling system broken and in that one file, you can return to title, open a second file, and you're still in journal state with the event handling system still broken. The easiest way of setting up is in Haunted 1, and so that's what we most often see. Journal state was originally discovered by me back in the start of 2021 alongside the other major glitches. So we've shown this scenario off a few cases, but here I am in Haunted Chapter 1. I've buffered past a sign, I'm standing near an edge, and the nice thing about Haunted Chapter 1 is that its default spawn location is inside of this sign here. And that makes journal state very convenient to set up with Haunted Chapter 1. So we've broken the camera, let me go fix that camera real quick. The fastest way of setting up journal state is actually to not use that signpost I bypassed earlier, but to just bypass this one with buffer glitch again. I'm going far enough left and then I'm heading straight down. I can walk straight off the edge here, but again, for a visual cue, I'm gonna walk on screen. And all we have to do is, as we're falling, anytime in that fall, we've opened up the menu. Now we're inside of the sign with the menu open, and to set up journal state, all we have to do now is watch something in the journal. So ordinarily when you watch something in the journal, it reviews some sort of story segment, it'll temporarily load in that other screen, stuff like that. If I hit yes to watch something inside the journal though, it will fail. It immediately kicks me back. We're now in journal state. The reason it failed is because we already had an event open, or an event running, and that is the event that we're inside this sign. Now we've properly concluded the sign event, however we haven't concluded the journal event that we just tried to watch a moment ago. And because of that, now whenever we conclude other events, it will sort of kick us back to this journal screen, a little bit confused about how it's supposed to be concluding other events. In journal state, you can interact and do any sort of event, but as you do so, here I'm going through the dialogue options of this NPC. After, it'll kick you to the journal screen. There are some things you can do, but a lot of things will trigger this journal. You can go to a store, you can open chests, that's plenty fine. Those aren't interrupted by journal state. Talking to NPCs is interrupted, using path actions on NPCs is not. Interacting with a save point, you don't even get the option to start saving. It immediately kicks you to the journal. And story cutscenes are a little bit special. You'll watch the story cutscene at first, and after progressing through it though, it does kick you back to the journal. And in fact, we haven't actually triggered the next step of the story that got interrupted. The other thing about watching a story cutscene though is that we're now no longer in journal state. That has fully kicked us out of it. Watching something in the journal is related to a story cutscene, and that has properly concluded journal state. I can now interact with things again, and it works fine. Alright, but let's go set up journal state again. I'm just going to fall off the world. As I'm falling, I open up the journal, close out of that. We're now in journal state again. There's a few other things I'm going to demonstrate, but for the most part this has covered most of it. In journal state again, we could re-trigger this event. Maybe if that particular story gave us an item, we could re-trigger that, although that is rarely the case. The other way of clearing journal state is just by watching something in the journal. So we've talked about how a story cutscene will clear journal state. Just watching something in journal, anything, that will properly clear journal state, because now we've watched a story cutscene. And we can talk to people again. Alright. So why is this useful? Well, again, it's not very useful in this Haunted Chapter 1, but fortunately we can transfer it between files. So one last time, I'm opening up the journal while falling inside that sign. I'm going to close off the menu. We're now in journal state. There's a little bit of a quicker way we can do this without having to watch Haunted run at that sign for a bit. Again, in journal state, it has this event handling system all broken. But the key thing here now is that this is retained when going between files. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm returning to title. There aren't any events, or not much of events, on the title screen itself that can trigger journal state. If you do a new game right now, it will clear journal state, but it'll reset and not actually give you a new game. You'll watch the first cutscene, it'll kick you back to the title screen, and you'll get some weird layering stuff going on there as well, because it didn't properly close that new instance. We're not going to be doing that though, we're just going to continue the game. That way we can keep journal state, and I'm going to be demonstrating something here, in Forest of No Return. Now something we haven't been able to do previously is get inside trigger regions that trigger cutscenes rather than just some sign that kicks you back. Ordinarily you might try and buffer into a trigger region. That was a poor demonstration of a buffer, but ordinarily you could try that and it wouldn't in this case because it's just putting you into a cutscene, very different from normal signs. And so we can't actually, in normal cases, get past cutscene triggers like this. However, with journal state, it just kicked us to the journal and hasn't properly moved us. We're actually still inside the trigger. If we go back out and enter, we can see that the trigger happens there again. And so journal state lets you bypass side story triggers, which is something a little bit stronger than buffer glitch is able to do. Journal state could also let you get inside of signposts if you needed to, but you can just buffer to do that. And so in this case, if we wanted to, we could entirely bypass the boss that's required for the side story. You can guide the NPC back to home. You can also just purchase the candy, which is what we're here for. And overall, journal state doesn't get cleared as well when you do side stories, so you could use this consecutively with some other cases. There's not many side stories that have trigger regions like this. Kit the Traveler, the very first one, has a trigger region. There's some other things that you might be able to bypass. Little bits of sequence breaking here and there, but not much. But here it's pretty useful in that you get to bypass what is ordinarily a super boss and just conclude this if you wanted to. And then later this cutscene trigger itself would go away if you actually concluded the quest. Alright, aside from that, we've also mentioned how it lets us bypass guards, so let's just go on into Grandport and demonstrate that. And again, I still have journal state active. Not only did it transfer between files, but watching a side story cutscene doesn't clear journal state. Only story cutscenes or watching something in the journal will conclude journal state. Alright, so we saw in the intro demonstration that there was something to do with maybe some tiny travelers, which is a variety of different glitches having to do with that, but let's just look at what we can do. In journal state, whenever you're activating it's sort of half resetting you to where you originally set the journal. And so here, if I talk to someone indoors and advance through their dialogue, and this can be any NPC inside of any house, it won't properly put us back inside the house. It's zoomed out for a moment. In fact, it thinks that we're in an outdoors area, and all of those NPCs have also been unloaded inside the house. And as we exit, though, we can see we have tiny travelers. The way inside houses works in this game is that it's actually just zooming in, and it's made all the characters small. You can tell this because, well, the outside of the house looks much smaller than it is on the inside. And so it achieves this by actually shrinking your sprites. But if we exit some sort of building without properly going through the exit, or it already thought we were outside, then we remain shrunken. And I can demonstrate a way of fixing this. Again, if you just enter indoors, we can see that the screen is zoomed in. If I exit normally, I'm larger again. But again, if you trigger journal state or just talk to an NPC while journal state's active, it's sort of reloading the screen, because that's how journals work. When you watch a cutscene, it has to put you back where you originally triggered the journal from. In this case, that's putting us here. Alright, so that's all well and good. Well, why am I in Grandport? It turns out, with tiny travelers, and this guard in particular, this is enough to just bypass this. This NPC wasn't placed close enough to their door. This is the only NPC in the game that you can do this with, but with tiny travelers, and just tiny travelers, you can just walk right past them, like so. And then from here, you can use some path actions. We can scrutinize. It's a low percent, but this is thieving tips and tricks, rather useful. Now, ordinarily right now, we'd actually be a bit stuck inside this house, but, well, we're inside a house with an NPC, let's just talk to them, and now we're tiny travelers again. And we can just walk right back out of the house, and we still have journal state. So that's a rather useful use of journal state and tiny travelers. There is another way of setting up time travelers, and I'm going to demonstrate that in this video just a bit later, but journal state lets you put tiny travelers on any screen, whereas the other one is a bit of a different setup. Now what else can we do with this? Well, in the original demonstration, and I've mentioned a few times, we can unload guards entirely. That is also done with tiny travelers inside buildings, some related features to it. I've mentioned how when we talk to an NPC inside, it's thinking we're outside because the most recent trigger, or how we originally set up journal state, was when we were inside, but now the most recent trigger of journal state, or going to the journal, was while we were indoors. And if we clear journal state now, it'll probably close things out, and it'll conclude going to the journal when we last triggered it. It's a bit complicated what that means, but let's just go ahead and do it. If we watch something in the journal, it's going to basically reload the screen. It's also going to clear journal state, so now we no longer have journal state, unfortunately, but once it's cleared the screen, it's placing us in the state when we last triggered something going into some last event, which it thought was a journal event. And so it thinks we're indoors. In fact, it thinks us specifically in those doors. We can see that loaded in. But a nice thing about all this is that, well, all the outdoor NPCs are unloaded. Much like before when it thought we were outdoors and we were in fact indoors, the indoor NPCs were unloaded. Now all the outdoor NPCs are unloaded, and the indoor ones are. And so that lets us bypass any guards. This one we were able to sneak past because of tiny travelers, and this one guard in particular was not placed correctly. But any other guard in the game, tiny travelers isn't enough, but you can still get past them with this unloading. And so we can go in here. It doesn't properly put us inside because, well, we didn't enter. It thought we were already indoors, so it didn't unload or show things here, but the NPCs are still loaded inside buildings, and so you can a little bit blindly navigate and interact with them. We are no longer in journal state though, so it's a little bit harder to exit. We get stuck inside a little bit, but you can of course just fast travel to get out of these scenarios. So again, in total, how we did that was we had journal state. First we talked to any NPC inside any building, then we exit a building and clear journal state by watching something in the journal, and that will unload all outdoors NPCs. If you need another example of this, you can rewatch the intro because that was another demonstration of how that works. Alright, and since we're covering tiny travelers, or a version of tiny travelers in this video, I'm going to demonstrate yet another tiny travelers you can do, and this one is a bit more well known, and is even simpler to set up. It has nothing to do with journal state, but it has to do with tiny travelers, so I'm going to demonstrate it here. To achieve tiny travelers, we're going to be completing a certain side story. We're completing it with the diva dress option for completing the side story, so we purchase or steal that. The side story is with this NPC indoors here. There's two ways of completing this side story though. One of them is by guiding them outdoors, and the other is by giving them that item. And because it either concludes indoors or outdoors, when the developers were setting up the side story, they accidentally made it so that it automatically or always thought you were outdoors. And so if we conclude it with the version of the side story that is keeping us indoors by giving them the stress, the game currently thinks we're outdoors. But not fully. This is a bit different than the other types of tiny travelers we were seeing before. But since it thinks we're outdoors enough, if we now fast travel out, it doesn't think to reset us to set us to be outdoors. And if we just fast travel anywhere, it will keep us in the tiny traveler state. It never reset that, because it thought we were already outdoors, so it didn't need to reset these sorts of things. A bit of a strange explanation for that one, but again, that one's very simple to set up. However, you can only do it once, because once you've triggered that side story, it's done. This is a really convenient version of tiny travelers though, in that you can just keep warping around. So long as you don't enter a building and exit it, you'll keep tiny travelers. You can warp multiple times, you can go here, you can go elsewhere. Now tiny travelers itself isn't very useful though. There's maybe a few ways of getting out of bounds, slightly different. Your collision does get smaller. A demonstration of that I often go for is these NPCs. You can't normally fit between them, tiny travelers can, so your hitbox is a bit smaller. You can, as before, get past this NPC guarding a house in Grandport, but otherwise tiny travelers doesn't have much use. Still, that's just another way of setting it up. The journal state version of it is a bit more powerful. This version of tiny travelers, it's not going to let you unload NPCs, it just makes you tiny. But it is tinier in a more permanent sense, so maybe that's a bit fun. And you could run around the game for a long while there. You are just a lot slower though, and you'll get more encounters because you're slower and can't make it as far. Still though, it's a fun glitch to experiment around with. The fastest way and most convenient way to set up journal state is just bypassing the sign. You just go a little bit left, then run straight down. As you're falling, watch something in the journal. We're now in journal state. In fact, since you're transferring this to other files more often than not, you'll return to title immediately. Although we've seen in other videos that when you do it like this, there's a text box open. And in fact, this is the signs text box, and as we recall, we're also in journal state, so if we conclude the event of watching this text box, hitting continue, and hitting A while we do that, we're opening the journal in the background, and that actually has to do with double title screen. You can do a lot with this, but if you're just trying to set up journal state and open a file, you can still do it this way. Just don't mess with that background layer, and open up whatever second file you want to be using this on. So I could demonstrate again here, loading it in. Now sometimes when you have multiple layers, such as that background instance, it'll give you a black screen. To clear that, you just open and close the pause menu. So now we have journal state in any other file. Now that said, there are some slightly faster ways of setting it up if your route for a speedrun route allows it. The slightly faster way of setting up journal state, if you're in some sort of category or route that allows you to fit this in, is to simply have Swarky already tagged, but without having recruited on it, and then just warp to Swarky itself, and, well, buffer past the sign. This way you don't have to return to title, do a new file, all those sorts of things. You can just do it all in one file. Once you've set up journal state, you can then warp to, let's say, Grandport, and unload the NPCs there, or whatever you might be interested in doing. Maybe in all side stories, you could use this to actually get the Devourer of Men side story a little bit easier, or in maybe a few other cases. Now, one thing I will say, this is a little different in the setup. We're actually going to have to watch the journal twice in a certain way. And that's just because if I fall off the world right now, it's taking me back to where I originally entered the screen from. The key thing about a new Haunted file is that it just uses the default spawn point, since it hasn't had you come in from any screen yet, and the default is inside the sign. Well, there is a way of setting our spawn point from when we fall off the world in an actively running game back to the default, and that's just actually, well, watching something in the journal. Again, journal sort of loads some other screen, then puts you back to where it started. And so when it reloads the screen here, it's made our default respawn point when falling off the world, well, back to the default. If I do it now, I'm inside the sign. And so in total, when setting up journal state, when you have a run like this where you've tagged Swarky and you're just wanting to set up journal state, you'll buffer past the sign at any point really while you're on this screen, watch something in the journal. I've already done that in this demonstration, but you'd watch it once, and then fall off the world. And now we're inside the sign and we can get journal state by watching something in the journal again. And from here, we can directly warp out of here. Now we will carry with us with this sign, but we can just tap that and close out the menu and we're fine. We're in journal state. Another thing journal state interacts with are the triggers within shrines themselves for getting subjobs. So again, we've talked about how it triggers with signs, optional bosses, NPC talking stories, side stories, most events that you can think of. These also are included, however it prevents us from actually getting the secondary job. We don't have a job menu unlocked at all in this case. We did not get the scholar job right here. The other thing it can interact with a little bit differently is with for the character recruitments. So here we could try recruiting. And again, as we do so, we're a bit blind to what we're doing. But I'm just going to be mashing for a while here. This is advancing through the sort of pop-up black background text area. Eventually I'll be able to tap up or down. Just like different options. If I hit yes here to actually recruit Ophelia, the game will soft lock. If I hit no here, it does kick us out, so that's fine, but just keep in mind that character recruitment also doesn't work, and you'll get soft lock. But that about covers all the different sorts of interactions. Again, journal state is mostly for bypassing side stories and unloading NPCs if you're going to use it by itself, but even more importantly, it's used with double title screen. And there are other glitch setups that might leave you in journal state, so you'll have to keep it in mind. Anytime you get left in journal state though, you can freely clear it just by watching something in the journal. And so all in all, it's mostly a catalyst for some other glitches, specifically double title screen, and then just keep it in mind with various other triggers that it might lead to.